Alright y'all, this week we're just going to be reviewing the 3 methods that we've learned so far for solving a quadratic. So this is just a review. Now the 3 methods that we've learned to solve a quadratic, remember I'm not saying factoring, I'm saying solving a quadratic, is the first one by graphing the quadratic. Solutions is one of my rocks words. So when I'm looking for my rocks words, all I have to do is look at a graph and find where that quadratic crosses the x-axis, and those numbers right here where it crosses the x-axis would be my solutions. That's the first method for solving a quadratic. Graph it, find the solutions, which means find the x-intercepts. The second method we learned to solve a quadratic is by factoring. Okay. We spent a long time factoring before this break, which is where we take a quadratic that has an a, b, and a c, and we fill out an x puzzle, where a times c is in the top, b is in the bottom, and a is underneath. We solve that x puzzle and we're going to get some sort of factored form, x plus or minus some number and x plus or minus some number. Those are the factors, which means the solutions are the opposites. Not opposite parentheses, the opposite numbers that are in the parentheses. So if this one right here said x plus 3, and this one said x minus 5, so plus 3 minus 5, then my solutions are minus 3 plus positive 5, the opposites of what's in the factored form. The solutions are the opposites of the factors in factored form. The third and final way we learned to solve a quadratic, which is what we learned last week, is by using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is one of the ways that we can solve a quadratic where it will never not work. This will always work. What we have to do is we have to calculate the following very complicated but super cool equation: x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. You get to hear me sing it again. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All you have to do is plug in the values for b, a, and c in parentheses and calculate what the value would be when you use a plus sign and when you use a minus sign. So it takes 2 equations in Desmos or in a calculator, but Desmos is a calculator, for you to find the solutions or what the x's are. Those are the 3 methods we've learned to solve our quadratics. We're going to be doing a few problems, but we're going to do them in all 3 methods to show you that it doesn't matter which way you choose. You get to pick at this point which one you're using to solve your quadratics. So we're going to solve the following quadratic using all 3 methods if possible. The first one that we're going to solve is the quadratic f of x equal to x squared minus 7x minus 18. Now the first way I'm going to do this is by graphing. So to graph this, I need graphing software. So I'm going to go to Desmos and I'm going to type in exactly that equation into my Desmos. So f of x equals x squared minus 7x minus 18. And Desmos has graphed this for me. We see the entire quadratic. If I were to zoom out there, we have the vertex, we have the y-intercept, but I don't care about those. When we're solving, we're looking for the x-intercepts. We're looking for the rocks. So for this one, based on the graph, our solutions would be negative 2 and 9. Back on our paper, we're going to sketch that really quick. It doesn't have to be the most accurate sketch, but here we go by graphing. We have a graph, and we said the solutions were at negative 2 and at 9. So that's what our quadratic sort of look like, give or take. So we would say that the solutions are negative 2 and 9. However, when you're filling out our digital forms, if you remember, we've been using the format where you would just type the numbers. So instead of putting the word and in between them, you're going to put negative 2 space 9. That's what you would write on the digital forms to answer this question as what are the solutions for this quadratic. Okay? The second way that we're going to solve this quadratic is by factoring. So when we are factoring, we need to figure out what the a, the b, and the c are. A is 1, b is -7, and c is -18. We set up and solve an x puzzle just like we do. A times c goes in the top, that's 1 times -18. B for bottom, so -7 goes in the bottom, and my a value is 1. That's the setup. So I'm looking for a number that will multiply to 18, or -18, and simultaneously add to -7. Now if you look at the magic number sheet on the green piece of paper in your resources, you'll remember that when the top is negative and the bottom is negative, then they're opposite signs, and the bigger one is negative and the smaller one is positive. Now, 1 and 18 are not 7 digits away from each other, and 3 and 6 are not 7 digits away from each other, but 2 and 9 are 7 digits away from each other. The bigger one is 9, the smaller one is 2, so I have -9 and 2 as my solutions for this X puzzle. I play a reducing game on both sides, kind of ran out of room, sorry, and then I would know that the factored form is x minus 9, x plus 2. That so far is just factoring. These are the factors. I have not found the solutions yet. But I know that the solutions are just the opposite from the numbers here in the factored form. So my solutions are -9 and, oops, sorry, that's not correct, are +9 and -2 because they're the opposites of these right here. Now again, because we're doing the digital forms, instead of typing +9 and -2, what you're going to type in is in number order from least to greatest, -2 space 9. The same numbers, because we're solving the same quadratic just with a different method. The last method that we're going to use to solve is the quadratic formula. X, I'll write it down again for you, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We just have to fill in all of those numbers. So we're going to do x equals the opposite of b. Well, I already wrote down what b was because I used it in factoring. So -7 plus or minus the square root of -7 squared minus 4. I'm running out of room. Let's see if I can move this to the side. Yep, okay. 4 times 1 times -18, that's a and c. All of that over 2 times a. Ooh, that's a mess. I don't want to calculate that in my head, and I'm sure you don't either. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that exact equation that we just wrote down with all of the filled in numbers, and we're going to go calculate it. We would do this in a calculator, but Desmos is a calculator, so we're going to go to Desmos to calculate. Don't need that anymore, but I do need to type in the parentheses equation. X equals divide sign first. It's easier that way. So it's underneath the question mark. It's like a little slash. -7. Now, there's no plus or minus button, but because it's called a plus or minus, you pick one of them. I'm going to choose plus. Square root you get by typing SQR, and the moment I press T, it will switch to a square root, SQRT. B squared minus 4 times A times C, all of that over 2 times A. Whew, that's a lot, but hey, check it out. Didn't we answer 9 as one of my solutions already? That seems great because it's the same quadratic, solving with a different method. Now that's only one of them because I've only used the plus sign so far. So I'm going to duplicate. Let me show you how I did that. I go to the settings tab and I duplicate that equation. It's going to type it again for me. But I don't want a plus sign this time. I want a minus sign. If I change that to a minus sign, then you see that Desmos is calculating this for me, and that x is equal to 9 and x is equal to -2. It's even showing you here on the graph. -2 and 9. Okay? So we look at that and we go back to our notes and we say, all right, well, x is equal to 2 and x is equal to, -2 and x is equal to 9. So again, my solutions are -2 and 9. I would type exactly what I got, -2 space 9, into the online forms. All of these are normally appropriate ways to write your answers. If we were doing this in class, all of them would be acceptable. But because we're doing this on the online form, then this is going to be the way you want to type it in. Just the numbers with a space in between. Wow, that's one quadratic we solved in 3 ways. The next slide, I'm not going to talk through how to do it. I'm just going to let you pause on this slide and see the work for another problem. After that problem, there's one more that I do want to do for you. So pause the video on the next slide and write all of this down on your notes, and then keep going, and I will explain the last problem for you. So here's your next example. I know, boom, it's on the screen. So we started with the quadratic 8x squared minus 6x minus 5. And again, I can solve this one in 3 methods. I can graph it in Desmos, I can factor it, and I can use the quadratic equation. Couple notes on this. If you're going to graph it and you're looking at Desmos, it's going to give you decimal answers. Now, if you know me, you know I like my fraction answers. So if you're looking at your Desmos or at your quadratic equation even, because it gave me the decimal answers, and you're like, I know Miss Quigley's going to make my answer as a fraction. Here's what you do. You go to your calculator, which in this case is your Desmos, and you're going to type in those decimals. -0.5 is what I had. You see how this button over here changed to like box over box? That's the Desmos version of change this to a fraction. So if I select that, it's going to change it to a fraction, -1/2. I can do the same thing for 1.25, which is what I got out of my Desmos, and I click fraction please, and it's going to give me 5/4. So when you do these kinds of questions, either by graphing, by factoring, or by the quadratic equation, and you get a decimal answer, you guys know I'm going to ask for the fraction. So that's how you would change it to a fraction using Desmos instead of your TI-84 calculator. All right, last one, I'm going to walk all the way through this one. The quadratic that we're going to solve is f of x equal to x squared minus 4x minus 9. This is the one that we are going to be solving now. First method we're going to solve this is by graphing. Graphing, I'm going to use a graphing software to do. So I'm going to pop over to Desmos, get this out of there, and I'm going to type in that equation. F of x equal to x squared minus 4x minus 9. Make sure I typed it in there right. Yeah, no typos. Okay, so then I look, and it's got the entire quadratic there, cool, but the ones that I'm worried about for the solutions are the rocks, which are the x-intercepts. If you look, these x-intercepts are kind of ugly. That's okay, Desmos solved it for me. So I would write down and sketch this for myself on my own screen. -1.606 and 5.606 are my solutions. So here's my sketch of it. Again, it does not have to be absolutely perfect, so here's going to be -1.606, and here's going to be 5.606, and there's my sketch. So I know my solutions are -1.606 and 5.606, but the way that I'm going to type that in on the Google form, the way that we're asking to format it is -1.606 space 5.606. Those are the list of the solutions from least to greatest. There's the first method to do this. So the second method that we learned is by factoring. So I set up and solve an X puzzle. I need A, I need B, I need C. A times C goes in the top, so 1 times -9 is -9. B for bottom, so it goes in the bottom. My A value is 1. Now I'm going to solve this X puzzle, so let's do this, let's do it down here. So if I do 9, factors are 9, are 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. It does not look like I'm going to be able to solve this X puzzle. There's no way I can combine 1 and 9 to get 4, or 3 and 3 to get 4. So I'm kind of stuck. Guys, in fact, this particular quadratic is not factorable. And this is why it's super important to know other methods to solve a quadratic, because for factoring, it's not always going to work. You can't use this method. it is not foolproof. There are going to be quadratics that you cannot solve using factoring. This is one of them. So sometimes you're going to get stuck on an X puzzle and you need to think to yourself, am I just doing this X puzzle wrong, or is this one of the ones that I cannot solve by factoring? And if it is, you need to choose one of the other two methods, graphing or the quadratic equation, to finish it. Quadratic equation will always work. It's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4, I ran out of room again, let me scoot it over, 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. A, b, and c are the same for factoring and the quadratic equation. So I'm going to use a quadratic equation and a calculator to finish this. So I'm going to pop over to Desmos, don't need that, and I start typing. X equals big fraction, negative b, plus, because I have to choose one of them, sqrt b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Am I making any typos? It looks pretty good to me. See, we have a really, really long repeating decimal here. And if I need to round it to the nearest thousandth, I would look to keep the third decimal and look behind it and say the phrase of 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. This is a 5, which means I raise this score to 6. Now, if you're having trouble with the rounding, another thing you can do is look at the graph itself. If you notice over here at the graph, if I click this, it's already rounded it to the nearest thousandth for you. So you are good, you can just use that number right there. Well, that's only one of the solutions, right? We need 2 solutions because we need to do both the plus and the minus version. So I'm going to change this plus to a minus, and it's going to give me another long repeating decimal that should look familiar to you. And I can round it by just clicking on the numbers in the graph. And these look familiar to you because these are actually the numbers we got when we graphed the equation, because again, you can solve quadratics in multiple ways. So we would know that x is equal to, when I round to the nearest thousand, negative 1.606, and x is equal to 5.606. So when I'm typing this into the online forms, just like with graphing, I would type negative 1.606 space 5.606. We can solve quadratics in many ways. We've learned 3 of the methods that we can use to solve a quadratic. You get to pick your favorite one and explore using all 3 this week. We empower, we impact, we love. We are Skeeter Nation.